speaker today, I'm going to do a little bio here and give an introduction. Ty and I have been communicating. We had a little bit of an arrangement, and then we had to rearrange a little bit. I'm just glad that we were able to work. And I thank you for helping us with this.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. You live in Danville?
I live in Gary County.
Gary County. Okay, I knew he wasn't. He was close. I knew he was close. We had our conversation. But Auditor Harmon is, I guess, communicating with out in the state, and this is one opportunity, stopping by Rotary clubs or other organizations and giving an update or sharing information. And Lord knows we all can use a little more information. But he was first elected in November of 2015 as the 47th Auditor of Public Accounts in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. He was elected to a second term in 2019, and he had previously served in the House of Representatives before that for 13 years, representing Boyle and Casey County, and before that, Washington County.
Yeah, Boyle and Washington was most of the time, but right there on the end when they redistricted Boyle and Casey.
Yeah, that redistrict. We don't want to go there.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But throughout his life, he's had a philosophy that he's adopted that he just wants to help out and be a part of what goes on and serve as the public would have him. He wants to just leave a legacy. And I really like this down here. It says, I have no desire to leave a legacy except to serve the Lord, serve his family, and serve his country well, and community well. And I think that's pretty admirable. But without any further ado, I'll give you Mike Harmon.
How's everybody doing today? Well, it's certainly an honor to be here today to visit with you all, to kind of update you on some of the things that's going on in the auditor's office over the last couple of years. Those who know me know that I always like to start with something funny. Of course, I'm actually starting my 7th year as Auditor of Public Accounts, but if you've ever heard me speak, I always like to start with something funny. And first, let me give you a fact, and then I'll give you the funny. The fact is, I graduated EKU with a triple major in math, statistics, and theater. And I tell everybody that way I know the math, I know the statistics, and what I don't know, I just act like I know. So in politics, it works out quite well. But the other, of course, Valentine's Day just passed, and since I'm a stat guy, sometimes I watch for these statistics. Been married to my lovely bride, Lynn, for 31 years, be 32 very soon in July. But we were watching, and this statistic came up. It said 75% of married men didn't know their wife's favorite flower. And I thought that was crazy. And so I leaned over to my wife and I said, "It's all purpose, right?" Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Now, speaking of dough, no, I'm kidding. But as the auditor, we are supposed to protect the taxpayers. I have a running joke with Treasurer Ball. She goes around telling everybody she's the watchdog, and I go around and tell everybody the watchdog. And I tell we're kind of both right. You are the watchdog on the front end. The auditor's office is the watchdog on the back end, so together we've all got your dog covered, so your dog will be perfectly fine. Well, and I think it's important for us to take a little time and laugh too. We've been through a lot through this COVID season over the last couple of years, and you got to stop and pause and laugh a little bit, otherwise it'll kind of drive you crazy. The other thing is, I've noticed that if you don't get people laughing before you start talking about auditing and accounting, usually it takes a lot longer to wake everybody up afterwards, so it's good to keep them going. Well, one of the things that we issued just recently was our statewide Single Audit of Kentucky Volume 1. And many of you may remember when we released Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the statewide Single Audit of Kentucky last year, we had several findings. And basically, the statewide Single Audit of Kentucky, what it is, it's our reviews, the auditor's office of the state financials. Volume 1 deals specifically with the state's financial statement and controls. Volume 2 deals with federal compliance. Some of you may remember last year when we released it, We had well over 400,000 emails that were sent to the unemployment assistant line that went archived and unread, in a time frame when everybody was struggling to get their unemployment. The other thing that we found was in volume 2 of last year's was that there were 10 employees within the Office of Unemployment Insurance that had applied for unemployment compensation, even though they were still full-time employed. They had applied for unemployment compensation and actually accessed their own accounts, even though they had been specifically trained not to access their own accounts. And because of that one, we actually, last year, we referred that particular finding to the Office of Attorney General. Now, this year, we saw some similar items. Now, I will say, this year, if the Office of Unemployment Insurance did see some improvement from last year, but we were still seeing a great level of fraud within it. Going back to last year, they had early on they had done what was called the auto pay. They'd basically taken some key controls off to try to get unemployment compensation out very rapidly. I'm sure it was very well intended, but what happened was, just like sometimes we have the best of intentions but bad results, whenever you take key controls off, the fraud and the opportunity of fraud goes up substantially. So last year, when they did the auto pay, there was about $655 million paid out during a time frame when there was the possibility of fraud. Now, not all $655 million of that was fraudulent, but certainly there was an opportunity for fraud. So this year we continue to see some concern with fraud. To kind of give you an idea of what we saw. The Office of Unemployment Insurance, they tried to put in place some items to help prevent fraud, but sadly, a lot of them were not sufficient. For instance, we looked at 54 claimants that had listed their employment as either the Labor Cabinet or the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and there was well over about $333,000 paid out to those 54. So our auditors took a sampling of 13 of those 54, and all 13 were fraudulent. Primarily, they were fraudulent because, well, they didn't actually work there, so they were fraudulent. And of those claims that we looked at, there was over $20,000 paid out to those 13 claims, all of them fraudulent. We also looked at the third quarter. When we looked at the third quarter of fiscal year 2021, there was 2,455 UI claims that had received just 2 weeks of unemployment compensation during that time frame. Total of about $2.9 million was paid out. So we took a look at some of those within that. That would have been like January through March of 2021, and we did a sampling of 26 claims of those 2,455. Of those 26 claims we reviewed, 25 of them were fraudulent, and they had paid out about $29,000 to those 25 claims that we reviewed. In addition, there was 28,377 out-of-state UI claims processed for all of 2021 that was reviewed, and there was a total of $195 million that was paid to out-of-state claims. Now, of those, our team pulled 34 of those claims and reviewed, and of those 34, 15 of those claims were fraudulent, and of those 15, there was a little more than $69,000 paid out, with one claimant receiving $31,000 in unemployment compensation before it was stopped. Now, even though the Office of Unemployment Insurance did take actions to try to prevent fraud, in many of these instances they did so after at least 2 weeks of unemployment compensation was paid out. And really, if you just look at the small sample that we talked about, just in what we identified, there was over $118,000 in fraudulent payments just in that sample. And you know, if you think about that on the larger scale, there had to be massive fraud still. Now, we typically, and I know last year we released our statewide single audit of Kentucky Volume 2 in April, so we should be having Volume 2 come out in the next couple of months. Probably going to be a little bit delayed because that was the first year that we had a full year in the fiscal year when it came to the COVID situation, so it may be slightly delayed, but we will take a look and see. Now, one of the other things that we do, as was mentioned, I have 13 years in the Kentucky General Assembly prior to being an elected auditor, and so we work very closely. And of course, my chief of staff, she actually has 2 years in the House and 2 years in the Senate. Michael Goins, who's with me today, he was, you know, communications over in the House for a while, and our general counsel actually was a bill drafter prior to serving in justice. So we've had a pretty good record of advancing legislation to help government become efficient, effective, and ethical. One of those that I'm just going to touch on, we worked with the House and the Senate to pass in 2018 Senate Bill 144. Senate Bill 144 is what we call our AUP bill. A lot of people don't realize we actually invoice for our audits. When I first came in, about 2/3 of our budget came from invoicing. Only about 1/3 of it came from the General Assembly appropriation. So because we realize that it is like anything else, it's getting more and more expensive, we always look for ways to try to help our counties save money. So this was one way that we looked at it. And what our AUP bill does, if you've got a sheriff or if you've got a county clerk who has a clean financial statement audit the year before, no reported findings, they can apply for an office, what we call an AUP, agreed upon procedure. And why is that important? Well, it's still very transparent, but it ends up saving dollars. It takes less time to do an AUP. So kind of give you an idea on the first 2 years we're looking at it. When we looked at it initially, when we were promoting, we thought there might be a 25 to 50% savings conservatively. What we're actually finding in the first 2 years, we're seeing somewhere between a 65 to 70% savings in the cost of audits for our sheriffs and our county clerks who qualify and apply for to do the AUP. Just in the first 2 years, we had well over $800,000 in savings. We estimate by the time we close out the third year, we will have well over $1 million in savings for our counties just by doing the AUPs. Now, another thing that we pushed for in 2021, we pushed for House Bill 265, which some people don't know, but some sheriffs, not every sheriff, but some sheriffs have multiple tax settlement audits. They might have their regular tax settlement audit, but they might also have an unmined coal, they might have a gas and oil, there's some other things. Prior to House Bill 265, they would have to have generally, because the income dates, the reporting dates on those varied, so they might have to have 2 audits total, they might have to have 3 audits total or more, because you had to have a separate audit for each of those reporting periods. What 265 does is allow us to have a unified auditing reporting period so that we can audit. We basically have an audit that covers all of that. They don't really change the date that they take the incomes, but it changes so we can do one unified audit, thus saving money, because that way you don't have to have 2 or 3 audits, and there's a lot of efficiency. So we'll begin seeing some of those efficiencies very soon. It was basically started January 1st of this year. So I'm curious to see how the savings are in those regards. Now, certainly in addition to our normal audits, our fiscal courts, our sheriffs, or county clerks, in addition to our state audits, we also do what's known as our special exams. And I'm going to touch just briefly on one of the special exams we did. It's been about a year or two ago. We did a special exam of county attorneys. Now, when I first came into the office, I can't tell you the number of people that called me and said, "Hey, when are you going to audit the county attorneys? When are you going to audit the county attorneys?" And so we did a special exam of county attorneys. And prior to that, we had done some on child support enforcement, working with the state in that regards. But we did make a decision. We looked at 9 county attorneys. We ended up actually having 3 criminal referrals from reviewing the 9. 2 of them were actually county attorneys. 1 of them was the child support enforcement officer. But just to kind of give you a little detail, especially when it came to like the Boyd County, while auditors were gathering information and documents relating to an examination of the Kentucky Cabinet of Health and Family Services Child Support Enforcement Program, or CSE, which we released in 2019, they discovered other areas that we certainly wanted to look at. And like I said, on those referrals, we had a referral in Gallatin, a referral in Lawrence County, and a referral in Boyd County. Now, the one in Boyd County was somewhat interesting. During our initial review as part of the Child Support Enforcement exam through the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, auditors uncovered potential fraudulent activity that led to more than $16,000 in excess payment to a former Boyd County Child Support Office supervisor during the fiscal year 2018. On September 26, 2019, APA auditors requested bank records for the Boyd County Child Support Program for the year ending June 30th, 2018. Following this request, Boyd County attorney advised that the former Child Support Office supervisor had returned with the bank statements and acknowledged that she had taken money from the Child Support Office. So, as I like to say, this appears to be our Perry Mason moment. As I understand, our auditors just went in, they just requested the bank statements, and the next day the Child Support Enforcement Officer comes in and says, "I know why the auditor's here, I've been stealing." So now I told that to someone the other day, and they were a little bit younger, one of our newer auditors who had just started, and they asked me, "Who's Perry Mason?" So I'm beginning to feel a little bit old, but so basically just by asking a few questions, just shining a little light, sometimes it's amazing. I think reporters had said in the past, and others, sunlight is perhaps the best disinfectant. So, it is important for us to do it. Now, in that particular case, that one led to a 77-count indictment in state court and a plea agreement to federal charges. She pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court to 1 count of mail fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and was sentenced to 36 months in prison. Federal investigators found that she had stolen more than $126,000 over a 6.5-year period. That all came about by auditors asking one question. Now, in June, jumping to our other one, in June, the Lawrence County attorney, we jumped subjects there. In June, our Lawrence County attorney was indicted on 9 counts of wire fraud and 5 counts of federal program theft, and his wife was indicted on a single count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Now, these particular charges on that one came out also part of that audit, and what happened was when we did this audit, we found out that the Lawrence County attorney actually had been paying his staff bonuses, which is against Section 3 of the Kentucky Constitution anyway, but of the about $134,000 in bonuses he had paid, about $126,000 of them went to his wife, who also was salaried at $40,000 per year as well. So definitely bad idea to pay bonuses. even worse, to pay the majority of those to his wife. And I think if I recall, it seems as if that, by comparison, the assistant county attorney received a total of $2,150, and another assistant county attorney received $650 for that same 2-year period. So, needless to say, that with the total amount of that being paid to his wife was $126,500. And interesting enough, relating to that federal indictment, in which the investigators reviewed the Lawrence County delinquent tax account going back to March of 2013, because we looked at 2 years. They went all the way back to 2013. They alleged the Lawrence County attorney paid his wife more than $365,000 between 2013 and 2020. Once again, going in, shining a little bit of that light, and making sure. Now, as I always tell everybody, our motto is follow the data. We don't turn anyone, we don't give anybody a pass, we just simply follow the data. So, I think the work that we've presented here today kind of gives you an idea of some of the stuff that we do, some of the stuff that we have found out about, and stuff that we have referred, items we have referred. Certainly, I would encourage you to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. If you've got tips of waste, fraud, or abuse, please be sure to call us at 1-800-KY-ALERT, or you can go to our website at auditor.ky.gov. We also encourage you, if you know of anyone, we're always posting for positions. Just look at our website. You still have to apply on the state portal, but you can go to our website and see whenever we post new positions. And basically what you need, the minimum amount to be an Auditor 1 is a bachelor's degree. It can be a bachelor's degree in anything, but it has to be a bachelor's degree and 20 hours of accounting. So if you know of anyone that's looking for a position, or anyone that's in college, certainly we're always looking for individuals and encourage them to get the necessary minimum requirements. Yes.
What about, you mentioned that you were fortunate enough to reduce some referrals and end up with some guilty pleas or convictions.
Yes.
What about restitution?
Restitution, of course, as the auditor's office, we're a reporting agency. We find the data, we confirm the data, we report the data, anything along that lines. Now, I think if I remember correctly, there was some restitution, included in those. I don't have those in my talking points, but my understanding, there is some restitution. In the Boyd County specifically, there was. And I'm sure whenever, of course, the Lawrence County, we believe, based on some of the reporting in the news, they haven't yet, but we believe they're probably going to take a plea deal or, admit fraud. So we'll see what sort of restitution is set up in that regards. Yes.
Sounds like there's a shocking amount of fraud in unemployment. 25 out of 26 random, I assume they were randomly selected cases.
Yeah, those, yeah.
Were fraudulent. So has the state taken any steps to correct this on the front end and to ensure that?
Well, as part of our audit, we basically indicated that additional fraudulent, or software to help identify fraud. They had tried to put some in place and then shut it down after a week, and then they put some additional in place right towards the end of the fiscal year, which would have been around June of 2021. Probably one of the things that was most concerning to our most recent volume 1 that released for 2021 was there was a lot of things of concern that we reported, but one of the things that probably concerned me even more was when whenever you audit an agency, they have an opportunity to respond to our audit. Well, in their response, they were listing out, these are all the things we have done to help identify fraud, and they were listing software they had. Well, if you look at how they've listed it, in their response, they had this software package we put in place March of 2020. Well, then there's an entire year gap, and then we put this in place March of 2021. So they went almost a year, or right at a year, without putting additional software in place. Now, going back, the question is usually asked, are they clawing that back? Are they identifying additional fraud? And as I said, we did see improvement from 2020 to 2021, but there's still a lot of work that has to be done. And when you look at it, it is, when you look at the samples, you can't necessarily extrapolate out the same percentages, but obviously you can tell that there is a significant amount of fraud still there.
I can speak a little bit to that. They are now going back and finding it a year later, as Mike just said.
Yeah.
So as an employer, we've had a couple of calls and cases from unemployment, but yes, a year and 4 or 5 months later.
Well, and so much of that is, the businesses were shut down, and the unemployment system got overwhelmed in that regards. Certainly, there has to be a lot more improvement on the computer systems, and they're working on that. But there's just still a lot of work ahead of it, and so hopefully they can get that resolved. We're pulling for them. And one of the other things that kind of surprised me that in reading our audit. There was, at the end of the fiscal year, June 30th of 2021, there were still 120,000 claims that had not been resolved, that were still in process. So that in and of itself is also concerning, but so we will see. But thank you all so much. I'm open to more questions, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all, and thank you and God bless. Yes.
I have another question. Well, I didn't have a question. But anyway, the agreed upon procedures for sheriffs.
Yeah.
And the county.
Clerks, county clerks, yeah, county clerks and sheriffs.
Do they ever, once they get on that program, do they ever have to have audits again, or is that just forever?
No, there's a couple of things, if you've got a new sheriff or a new county clerk, brand new, or if there's a break in service and then come back, for another round, that first year they've got to have financial statement audit. Beyond that, we generally would like to do AUPs for about 3 years, and then on that 4th year, after 3, we will typically do, and it's at our discretion, but we will typically do a full financial statement audit about once every 4 years. And there's certain rules of accountancy that deals with, trying to look at controls, and so there would be some things that it would be difficult for us not to try to do it at least once every 4 years. But you look in those off years, you still have a very transparent format of review, and then you're seeing substantial savings. And in a time frame where unfortunately costs are going up left and right everywhere, anything that we can do to save the county's money be good. Yes.
Mike, I just listening to all these government plans and all these people that's working in the state unemployment office, also sort of unemployment. That's out and out fraud. It's grand theft, and I'm just wondering if the state has set the penalties to fit the crime. I mean, what's one thing they got 36 months or something for husband and wife. Yeah, the child support lady.
Right.
But how stiff are these penalties? I don't know. I never hear of any of them going to prison.
No, and if I understand correctly, at least what I have read in the press, because we haven't been notified or I have not received notification, but my understanding in the press, there was only one person that was even fired, and that was due for a separate incident, something different, if I remember reading the paper correctly. But obviously we don't know what the Attorney General is still doing or reviewing. We had also referred those same one to Executive Branch Ethics, so we don't know what Executive Branch Ethics is doing in that regards either. So, but I do understand the concern. It is, and if you look at our Volume 1, Volume 2, we identified those 10. In Volume 1, I believe it was 36, that we had 36 employees that we reviewed. Now, there was more than that. We just looked at a sample of 36 employees that were working for state government, still drawing a full-time check, but had, maybe lost a part-time job. But you remember when it first started, people were saying if you've lost any income, apply, you may qualify. And so really the system needed to be, not for the ones that work for the Office of Unemployment, they should know better, but the ones that if they worked for state government but didn't work for the Office of Unemployment Insurance, or even if you didn't work for the state but you still had a full-time employee but lost a part-time, you would think that the system would be set up to catch where you wouldn't get that. And for a while it was, but like during the auto pay in the previous year, they took those key controls off. So, in many ways, it's the administration's concern, not, like I said, once again, not for the 10 that applied that were within the Office of Unemployment Insurance, but some of those other employees, when everybody was encouraging them to apply, you would have thought but now the odd thing is you see some people that, were still working full time, but somehow or another got the unemployment. The people that weren't working at all had struggles getting through and getting it. So that's probably even more of a concern to me. Yes.
You found such a high percentage in your random samples of fraud. Whose responsibility, what agency's responsibility is it to look at the overall? And,
Well, obviously, from the standpoint, the immediate responsibility is leadership within the Office of Unemployment Insurance. I mean, it's their ultimate responsibility to make sure that they try to claw back as much of the fraud. Of course, as we've talked about before, the hard thing is it's not as if, it's not as if an individual used his own name to apply for it fraudulently and got it. Usually what you see is they use somebody else's name. Maybe they applied in Mike although I haven't received any that I know of, but who knows, I may get a 1099, or a W-2, but they might use Mike Harmon's name but use their bank account, and then trying to figure out where that's gone may be harder than not. And that's why you had to put all the additional software packages in place to try to identify the fraud, so it's, I can't tell you the number of people that I've heard from, hey, someone tried to, forget me being auditor, I've had a lot of people call me directly and say, hey, someone tried to use my name to get, I've got one sweet lady, she's in my church, and she's like, Mike, of course she got the checks anyway, but she's like, Mike, I didn't apply for this, I didn't ask for this, what am I supposed to do with these checks? And and so we kind of walk her through, because she didn't want to take anything that is not that she's not supposed to, but you see that time and time again. And of course, sadly, you also have some people that didn't get the checks, didn't get the deposit, but they got the W-2 saying that they got money that they're going to have to pay taxes on, which they'll work through. They won't necessarily pay tax, but it's just a headache to getting through to make sure that they can convince them that it's not them who got the money.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Now, don't spread that. He said crime does pay. So.
Oh, yeah, no. And having had a family member that got caught up in somebody using their stuff, I know the frustration for them too. But hey, welcome, and we're glad you were here today.
Thank you
so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I'd like to give you,
Thank you.
him being I hope this doesn't violate any gratuity or nothing like it. We'd like you to have this pen on our behalf.
It's not over $25.
No, it's not.